My name is Evelyn, and at 38, I never thought a cruel comment about my age would become the spark that changed everything. For 6 years, my CEO husband made it clear I was more of an embarrassment than a partner, until the night he told me I was aging too fast for his lifestyle. What he didn't know was that I'd already started painting again, submitting my work anonymously, building a life he knew nothing about. The moment my face appeared on screens across his charity gala, surrounded by the investors he was desperately trying to impress, I watched his world crack open. If this story speaks to you, drop a comment about where you're watching from, hit that like button, and subscribe for more stories about finding your power when someone tries to take it away. The penthouse gleamed like a jewel box that night, all chrome and glass and calculated perfection. I stood before the floor-length mirror in our bedroom, smoothing down the emerald silk of my gown, watching the city lights blink stories I'd never be part of. Below, in the grand ballroom Damien had rented for his annual charity gala, an orchestra tuned their instruments. The sound drifted up through the vents, discordant, searching for harmony. I knew that feeling. Maybe try something that hides more of your age. Damien's voice cut through my thoughts like a paper cut, small, sharp, surprisingly painful. He didn't even look up from his phone, thumb scrolling through what I assumed were last-minute RSVPs or stock reports or messages from his assistant. His tuxedo hung perfect on his frame, not a thread out of place. At 42, he wore success like cologne. I forced a laugh, light and practiced. This dress cost more than most people's cars, darling. It hides nothing, because there's nothing to hide. He glanced up then, his eyes doing that thing they'd started doing lately, cataloging, assessing, finding me wanting in ways he never quite articulated but always implied. Of course. You look fine. Fine. Not beautiful. Not stunning. Fine. Like a mediocre wine or adequate weather. I turned back to the mirror and applied another layer of lipstick I didn't need. The woman staring back at me was 38, yes, but she was also sculpted by the best trainers, dressed by the finest stylists, and maintained with the dedication of a full-time job. Because it was my full-time job. Being Mrs. Damien Hart, CEO's wife, required more hours than most careers. The gala was everything Damien promised his donors it would be. Champagne flowed like water. The flower arrangements cost more than my first car, and every surface seemed to shimmer with a kind of wealth that whispered rather than shouted. We floated through the crowd, his hand at the small of my back, proprietary, guiding, controlling the narrative of us. Damien. And the lovely Evelyn. Richard Chun, one of Damien's board members, approached with his much younger girlfriend trailing behind him like an accessory. You two never age, do you? Evelyn certainly tries, Damien said, his tone jovial for the crowd. Takes her longer to get ready these days. I tell her no filter works in real life. The men around us erupted in laughter. Richard's girlfriend smiled uncomfortably. I felt my face arrange itself into the expression I'd perfected over 6 years of marriage, gracious amusement at my own expense. My heart cracked a little more, a fault line spreading through foundations I'd thought were solid. The rest of the evening blurred. Photographs where Damien's hand gripped my waist just a fraction too tight, conversations where he spoke over my attempts to contribute, glances he threw toward younger women with an appreciation he no longer directed at me. I smiled through all of it, the perfect trophy gleaming under chandelier light. It wasn't until we returned home, until the mask of public perfection could finally slip, that I found my voice. Why do you do that? Damien was already loosening his bow tie, headed toward his home office. Do what? Make jokes about my age. Criticize how I look. Treat me like I'm some burden you're carrying instead of your wife. He stopped, turned, and in his eyes I saw something worse than anger. I saw boredom. Evelyn, you're lucky to be by my side. Do you know how many younger women would kill for your spot? This life. He gestured around our expensive prison. Maybe show a little gratitude instead of insecurity. The words hit like a slap. I stood there in my emerald gown, in our $1 million penthouse, surrounded by everything I was supposed to want, and felt absolutely nothing except the cold understanding that I'd been disappearing for years and no one had noticed. Not even me. The next morning, I called Maya. We'd been roommates in college, back when I double majored in fine arts and business, back when my sketchbooks were more important than my mirror. She'd gone on to become a creative director at a major agency, while I'd become this. Whatever this was. Coffee. I texted her. Emergency. She met me at our old spot, a cramped cafe near the university that still smelled like burnt espresso and possibility. Maya looked at me with the kind of X-ray vision only old friends possess. What did he do now? I told her everything. The comments, the humiliation, the way I'd started seeing myself through Damien's eyes, aging, trying too hard, lucky to be tolerated. I watched her face shift from concern to something harder, sharper. Evie. She only used my college nickname when she was serious. You used to light up rooms. Now you dim yourself to fit in his shadow. When did you stop painting? I don't know. 3 years ago? 4? I couldn't quite remember. The canvases had been packed away when we moved to the penthouse. Damien said they didn't fit the aesthetic. Your entire identity doesn't fit his aesthetic, Maya said flatly. And instead of changing the aesthetic, you're erasing yourself. I stirred my coffee, watching the cream swirl into oblivion. It's not that simple. It never is. But it starts with one choice. One thing you do for yourself, not for his approval. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. What would that be? If you could do anything right now, just for you, what would it be? The answer surprised me with its immediacy. Paint. Painting. That night, while Damien worked late at the office, I pulled my old sketchbook from the back of my closet. The pages were yellowed, the sketches rough, but looking at them felt like finding photographs of a person I used to be. Someone curious and bold and unafraid of taking up space. I flipped to a blank page and drew without thinking, my hand moving in ways it remembered even if my mind had forgotten. Lines became shadows. Shadows became a woman's profile. The woman's profile became something raw and real and nothing like the filtered perfection I'd been living. When Damien came home after midnight, I hid the sketchbook like contraband. He walked past me without a word, already absorbed in his phone. I watched him disappear into his office and felt the strangest sensation. Not anger, not even hurt. Just clarity, cold and bright as morning light. The next day, I searched online for art contests and exhibitions. Most required submission under your real name, but I found one, a national showcase for emerging artists that allowed pseudonyms. To focus on the work, not the identity, the website explained. I created an email account, e.harlow@protonmail.com. Harlow was my mother's maiden name, the name of the woman who taught me to see beauty in imperfection, who died when I was 23 and never got to warn me about men who loved your youth but not your soul. My first submission was a series I called Gilded Cage, portraits of women in beautiful spaces, looking toward exits. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Over the following weeks, Damien's control tightened in small, suffocating ways. He started commenting on my breakfast choices. Are you sure you want that croissant? The gala season is coming up. He reorganized my closet, removing anything he deemed too young or trying too hard. He scheduled my gym sessions and my salon appointments, presenting it as care. I'm just looking out for you, babe. Image matters in my world. His world. Not ours. His. I began to notice other things too. The way his assistant Vanessa, 26 and all polished ambition, lingered too long during their meetings. The way Damien's eyes tracked younger women at restaurants, at events, anywhere we went. The way he'd started going to the gym at odd hours and coming home smelling like cologne he hadn't left wearing. I wasn't stupid. I was just choosing not to see. But now, with my sketchbook filling up with drawings that showed what I'd been hiding from, I couldn't unsee anything. One night, I lay in bed pretending to sleep while Damien scrolled through his phone beside me. The light from his screen painted shadows across the ceiling. I opened one eye just enough to see him swiping through Instagram, models, influencers, girls who'd been toddlers when we met. He double-tapped hearts without hesitation, his face expressionless, mechanical. I didn't feel jealous. I felt relieved. Because for the first time in years, I understood that the problem wasn't my aging face or my imperfect body or my inability to freeze time. The problem was that I'd married a man who saw people as products, complete with expiration dates. And mine, according to him, was rapidly approaching. I closed my eyes and made a decision that would change everything. I just didn't know it yet. The invitation arrived on heavy cardstock, embossed with gold. Hartman Industries' annual investor gala. Another performance, another night of being Damien's most polished accessory. I stood in my dressing room. No, his dressing room. Everything in this house was his, holding a gown he'd selected. Silver, structured, safe. You're aging too fast for my lifestyle. Damien said it while nodding his tie, his tone as casual as if he were commenting on the weather. Try not to embarrass me tonight. The Singapore investors will be there and they're traditional. They expect a certain standard. My hands went numb. The dress slipped from my fingers onto the chair. What did you just say? He sighed, the sound of a man exhausted by having to explain obvious things. I'm not trying to be cruel, Evelyn. I'm being honest. You've let yourself go lately. The gym sessions, the treatments, you've been skipping them. People notice. I notice. Something inside me, something that had been bending and bending for years, finally snapped. Not with anger. That would come later. It snapped into perfect, crystalline understanding. Then go alone. The words came out steady, quiet. Damien turned, actually looked at me, surprise flickering across his features. What? I said go alone. To your gala. To your investors. To your perfectly curated life that apparently has no room for a wife who commits the sin of being human. I met his eyes and didn't look away. I'm staying home. For a moment, he looked genuinely confused, like I'd spoken a foreign language. Then his face shifted into that corporate smoothness, the one he used for difficult board members. You're being dramatic. Put on the dress, fix your makeup, and let's go. We're already late.
No.
Such a small word. 2 letters. It felt like dropping an anchor. Damien's jaw tightened. You'll regret this. Making me look foolish because you're having some kind of midlife crisis. He grabbed his keys, his phone, his perfectly constructed armor.
Fine. Stay.
But don't call me crying when you realize how good you have it. The door slammed. The apartment shook. And then silence. I stood there for a long moment, waiting for the panic to hit, the regret, the fear. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, lightness. I walked to the bar, poured myself a glass of wine I actually liked instead of the vintage Damien preferred, and called Maya. I did something, I said when she answered. About damn time. What did you do? I said no. I could hear her smile through the phone. Tell me everything. We talked for 2 hours. I painted while we spoke, the phone on speaker, my hands finally remembering what they were made for besides pleasing someone else. I painted the penthouse as a cage, painted Damien as a mirror reflecting only himself, painted myself as a woman walking toward a door made of light. Around midnight, my phone exploded with notifications. I picked it up, dread pooling in my stomach. The social media posts loaded one by one. Damien at the gala, arm around his assistant Vanessa, her champagne-flushed smile, and his hand on her waist. The captions were coy, the photos damning. Hartman Industries CEO steps out with mystery woman. Where's the wife? Damien Hart and stunning assistant steal the show. Age is just a number, new romance for tech titan? I stared at the screen, waiting to feel devastated. Instead, I felt free. He'd just handed me the truth in glossy, high-resolution evidence. I screenshotted everything. Then I picked up my paintbrush and created the most honest work of my life. I painted the photo, Damien and Vanessa, champagne glasses raised, his wedding ring carefully angled out of frame. But I painted it as a mirror image, showing what the camera didn't catch, his calculating eyes, her ambitious smile, the transaction of it all. I titled it Man with Borrowed Youth. The next morning, Damien came home to find me in the living room surrounded by canvases. He looked exhausted, his tuxedo rumpled, and something like guilt flashed across his face before the defensiveness took over. "Before you start." "I'm not starting anything," I interrupted. "I'm finishing something. Multiple somethings, actually." He noticed the paintings, then really noticed them. His face went through several emotions: confusion, recognition, anger. "You're painting again?" "Still chasing childish hobbies." He forced a laugh. "You'll thank me when I keep you from embarrassing yourself." I stood, brush still in hand. "I submitted to a national art competition last month. Under a pseudonym, so your precious image wouldn't be tarnished by your wife having the audacity to create something." He struggled for words. "That's not going to go anywhere, Evelyn. Be realistic." "I am being realistic. Realistically, this marriage ended the moment you decided my value had an expiration date. Realistically, I've been living in a museum of someone else's expectations. And realistically, I'd rather embarrass myself trying than succeed at being your perfect, silent, eternally 25 prop." I walked past him toward my studio, a corner of the guest room I'd claimed while he slept. Behind me, I heard him say something, probably another manipulation wrapped in concern. I didn't stop to listen. That night, I did something I'd been afraid to do for years. I pulled out the designer dress he'd bought me for last year's gala, the one I'd worn while he'd introduced me as the woman who keeps me young, and I burned it in the fireplace. The silk caught quickly, gorgeous and doomed, and I watched it turn to ash while drinking wine and feeling nothing but relief. Maya arrived an hour later with ice cream and champagne. "Burning evidence?" she asked, eyeing the fireplace. "Burning the woman I was," I corrected. She was beautiful, but she was suffocating. We sat on the floor, eating ice cream directly from the container, and Maya pulled out her laptop.
"Ok, e Arlo."
"Let's build you a real presence. Website, portfolio, social media, the works. If you're going to compete, compete properly." "The results won't be announced for weeks," I protested. "So?"
"Start now."
"Start before you're ready." That's what brave people do. We worked until dawn, building a digital identity for the artist I was becoming. No photos of me, just the work, raw, honest, unapologetically emotional. We launched it as the sun rose, pink and gold over the city that suddenly seemed full of possibility instead of prison bars. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning while Damien was in Singapore on business. I'd been avoiding him when he was home, spending my days in my makeshift studio and my nights on Maya's couch. The subject line made my hands shake. "Congratulations from the National Emerging Artists Exhibition." I read it 3 times to make sure it was real. My work, my anonymous, vulnerable, painfully honest work, had made it to the final round. Not just made it, but been selected as one of 20 finalists out of nearly 3,000 submissions. The exhibition would be held in 6 weeks at the Metropolitan Gallery, with press coverage, industry attendance, and potential representation for winners. I called Maya, who screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. I told you. When do we celebrate?" "I need to keep this quiet," I said, reality crashing back. "Damien can't know." "Not yet." "Screw Damien. This is yours. Your name, your work, your moment." But I couldn't think about Damien right now because my hands were shaking with something bigger than fear. It was possibility, dangerous and intoxicating. The exhibition wanted a short artist statement and 3 additional pieces. They wanted E. Harlow's story. I spent the next week painting with an urgency I'd never felt before, barely sleeping, forgetting to eat. I painted the silencing, a woman's face half covered by a man's hand that turned into a mirror. I painted borrowed time, an hourglass where the sand formed the shape of women's bodies. And I painted first snow, a closed door with light bleeding underneath. Maya helped me photograph everything, write the statement, submit it all before the deadline. We didn't tell anyone, not friends, not family, certainly not Damien. This was mine, fiercely and completely. Meanwhile, Damien's carefully constructed world was developing cracks. His company stock had dropped after rumors of his personal entanglement with Vanessa hit industry blogs. Nothing confirmed, nothing provable, but enough smoke to make investors nervous. He came home irritable, picking fights about dishes in the sink and my artistic mess taking over the apartment. "You're different," he said one night, standing in the doorway of my studio, his tone more accusatory than concerned. Yes, I agreed, not looking up from my canvas. "Who's giving you all this attention lately? Who are you dressing up for?" I almost laughed. I'd been wearing paint-stained jeans and my college sweatshirt for days. "I'm dressing up for absolutely no one. That's the point." His jaw tightened. "You're being vindictive. This art thing, it's to punish me for one mistake." One mistake. As if years of erosion could be summarized so simply. "I'm being alive, Damien. You should try it sometime." He left, and I returned to my painting, my heart steady in a way it hadn't been in years. The opportunity to make real money came unexpectedly. A local boutique hotel saw Harlow's website and commissioned a series of paintings for their redesign lobby. The pay wasn't enormous, but it was mine, earned by my hands, my vision, my late nights and early mornings. I opened a separate bank account, something Damien knew nothing about. I labeled it in my mind as the Freedom Fund. Each deposit felt like proof I could survive. More than survive, I could thrive. 3 weeks before the exhibition, Damien hosted a business dinner at an exclusive restaurant. He insisted I attend, play the dutiful wife, help smooth over concerns about his leadership stability. I agreed, mostly because I was curious to see how the performance would play out. The dinner was excruciating, 12 courses of watching Damien perform charm while making subtle digs. During the main course, he turned to his guests and said, gesturing at me like I was a project, my charity project. Been trying to find her a purpose for years. Every head turned to me. The table went silent. In the old life, the one from just months ago, I would have smiled gracefully, deflected, made everyone comfortable. Instead, I took a sip of wine and said clearly, "Then consider me your best investment yet. The returns are about to be extraordinary." Damien's smile froze. The guests laughed uncertainly, unsure if it was banter or battle. I excused myself to the restroom and texted Maya, "I can't wait to tell him." "Can I tell him?"
"Not yet," she wrote back.
"Let the exhibition speak first. Then your words will land different." She was right. Timing was everything. The night before the exhibition preview, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the penthouse in the dark, looking at all the expensive things Damien had chosen, the art that said nothing, the furniture that welcomed no one, the life that looked perfect in photographs and felt empty in reality. In the morning, everything could change. The critics could hate my work. The industry could laugh. I could be exposed as a fraud, a woman playing at purpose. Or I could be seen. Really, truly seen. I stood at the window watching the city wake up and whispered to my reflection, "You still matter. Even if no one else sees it, you matter." The phone call came from a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Harlow?" The woman's voice was professional, confident. She introduced herself as Clara Walsh, creative director for Luxe and Legacy, a high-end beauty and lifestyle brand that catered to women over 35. "I've been following your work online. Your exhibition preview dropped yesterday, and I need to talk to you about something time-sensitive." My mouth went dry. "I'm listening." "We're rebranding. Moving away from the youth-obsessed narrative that's dominated luxury beauty for decades. We want to build a campaign around authentic aging, the kind your art captures. Vulnerability, strength, transformation. We want Harlow to be the visual architect of this new direction." I sat down hard on my studio floor. "You want me to what exactly?" "Lead the visual campaign. Your art, your vision. We'd feature you as the artist behind it, interview you about the work, make you the face of creativity reclaimed. It's a 6-month contract initially, but if it performs like we expect, it becomes permanent. And it pays well. Very well." She named a figure that made my vision blur. More than I'd earned in 3 years of freelance work. Enough to leave, to start over, To breathe. I need to think about it, I heard myself say. Of course. But E. Harlow. Clara's voice softened. I looked up your real name. I know who you're married to. And I know what stepping into this visibility means for you. Whatever you decide, know that we chose your work because it's extraordinary, not to spite your circumstances. After we hung up, I sat in silence for an hour. Every fear I'd ever had screamed at me, you're not good enough. You'll be exposed as an amateur. Damien will destroy you. You're too old to start over. You'll fail publicly and spectacularly. But underneath the fear, quieter but stronger, was something else. This is yours. You earned this. Say yes. I called Maya. Then I called Clara back and said yes before I could change my mind. The paperwork came within hours, contracts, NDAs, project timelines. The campaign would be called Reclaiming Grace, launching in 3 months. They wanted to shoot the initial ads in the same ballroom where Damien had held his gala, the night everything changed. The irony was so perfect it hurt. Meanwhile, Damien's world continued its slow collapse. The board was conducting an internal review after an anonymous tip about discriminatory hiring practices. Damien insisted it was nothing, but I'd overheard enough phone calls to know it was serious. His company had been filtering resumes by age and appearance, prioritizing youth in ways that were probably illegal and definitely damaging now that it was public. The news broke on a Friday. Hartman Industries, under fire for age discrimination, ran in the business section, complete with testimony from rejected applicants and leaked internal emails. Damien spent the weekend locked in his office, his lawyer on speed dial. I painted through it all, barely noticing his spiral. I was focused on the campaign sketches, the exhibition opening in 2 weeks, the strange and terrifying sensation of building something that was entirely mine. On Monday, Clara's team arrived to scout the ballroom location. I met them there, standing in the exact spot where I'd once smiled through humiliation. The space looked different in daylight, smaller somehow, less intimidating. Just a room with good bones and bad memories. We want to shoot you here, Clara said, watching me take it all in. Standing where you stood then, but transformed. Same space, different story. Is that too painful? No, I said, surprised by how true it was. It's perfect. Let him see what he lost in the exact place he threw it away. The exhibition preview was invitation only, press, and industry professionals. I attended as E. Harlow, my real name listed in the program alongside my pseudonym. Maya came as my +1, holding my hand as we walked into the gallery where my soul hung on walls for strangers to judge. The room was already crowded, collectors, critics, journalists, artists I'd admired for years. My work hung spotlit and enormous, more powerful than I'd imagined it could be. I watched people stop in front of Man with Borrowed Youth, saw them lean closer to read the small placard describing it, watched recognition and discomfort cross their faces. A woman approached me, elegant and sharp-eyed. Are you E. Harlow? I need to tell you, your work made me cry. The silencing piece, the way the mirror turns into a gag. I've lived that. We've all lived that. More people gathered. They asked about my process, my inspiration, the pseudonym. I answered honestly, carefully, protecting only the details that would lead back to Damien. Not because I was afraid anymore, but because this moment was mine, and I wouldn't let him contaminate it. The reviews came in over the next few days. Stunning. Visceral. The voice of a generation finally finding words. One critic wrote, E. Harlow paints the invisible, the slow death of self that happens in relationships where love becomes control. This is not comfortable art. It's necessary art. I framed that review and hung it in my studio. 3 days before the campaign shoot, Damien came home early. I was in my studio, working on additional pieces for the exhibition's closing weekend. He stood in the doorway, and I could feel him looking at my back, calculating. We need to talk. I didn't turn around. Do we? Evelyn, I know things have been difficult, but I want to fix this.
Us.
I want to try. I set down my brush and finally looked at him. He looked smaller somehow, or maybe I was just seeing him clearly for the first time. What changed? I miss you. I miss us. You miss the version of me that made you look good. You miss the woman who didn't have opinions or boundaries or a career that had nothing to do with you. I stood up, wiping paint from my hands. That woman is gone, Damien. She burned up with that dress. His face hardened. This is about the gala. About one night where I made a mistake. This is about 6 years of mistakes. 6 years of you deciding my value based on my age and my looks and my willingness to shrink. I'm done shrinking. Because of some art hobby? His contempt showed through the concern. Because some small gallery gave you attention? I smiled then. Couldn't help it. The campaign launches next month. You'll see it. Everyone will see it. And you'll understand that this was never about you. This is about me finally remembering I exist. That night, he called my phone 17 times. I silenced it and slept better than I had in years. The morning of the shoot, I stood in that ballroom wearing clothes I'd chosen, hair I'd styled, makeup that enhanced rather than masked. The creative team moved around me like choreography, but I was still centered. When Clara called action and the cameras rolled, I looked directly into the lens and spoke the words we'd written together. I was told I was aging too fast for someone else's lifestyle, so I built my own. The footage would be edited, polished, set to music. But in that moment, standing in the room where I'd once felt so small, I felt infinite. The campaign wasn't just selling products. It was selling the truth that women don't expire, we evolve. That beauty isn't lost with age, it's reclaimed with courage. That night, the campaign teaser dropped across all platforms during a televised charity gala. The same gala Damien was attending with his board members, trying to salvage his reputation. I wasn't there to see his face when my image filled the screens. But Maya sent me a photo someone had taken. Damien frozen, champagne glass halfway to his lips, staring at the screen where his wife's face smiled with a confidence he'd spent years trying to extinguish. The caption she sent with it: "He looks like he's seen a ghost." I texted back: "He has. The woman he killed is back." My phone rang an hour later.
Damien.
I stared at his name on the screen, watched it ring and ring. Then I did something revolutionary. I answered. "Evelyn, we need to talk." I looked at my reflection in the darkened window, tired, paint-stained, completely and utterly myself. "Do we?" The line went silent. Then quieter, almost vulnerable. "Please." I smiled at the woman in the glass. "I'll think about it." I hung up and poured myself a glass of wine. Somewhere in the city, Damien was panicking. And here, in my studio surrounded by proof of my existence, I was finally, beautifully free. He showed up at midnight with roses. Not just any roses, the imported Juliet roses I'd mentioned loving once, years ago. In a conversation I was surprised he'd remembered. Damien stood in the doorway of what was still technically our penthouse, holding them like a peace offering, his expression carefully arranged into something approximating humility. "You looked incredible tonight," he said softly, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "The campaign. I had no idea you were doing something so significant." I watched him place the bouquet on the entry table, right where my current sketchbook usually sat. The gesture wasn't accidental. Nothing with Damien ever was. He was trying to replace my passion with his gesture, to reclaim the space I'd carved out for myself. I moved the flowers aside and opened the sketchbook instead, flipping to a fresh page. "Thank you for the roses." His eyes flickered with something, surprise, maybe, that I wasn't swooning. He loosened his tie, and I recognized the choreography of it, the corporate armor coming off, the vulnerable husband emerging. I'd seen this performance before. "Can we talk? Really talk?" He moved toward the living room, toward the seating he'd chosen, the furniture that had never been comfortable. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since I saw the campaign." I followed, but didn't sit. "What kind of thinking?"
About us.
"About how I've handled things." He ran a hand through his hair, another practice gesture. "I know I've been difficult. The pressure at work, the board breathing down my neck, the stress of maintaining everything we've built. I took it out on you, and that was wrong." The apology was smooth, rehearsed. I wonder how long he'd practiced it in the car on the way over. Damien, you didn't just take stress out on me. You spent years telling me I was aging out of your lifestyle, that I should be grateful you tolerated me, that I was embarrassing you simply by existing in the body I have. I know. He stood, moving closer. But that campaign tonight, it exposed you, Evelyn. The media, the attention, the scrutiny. You're not built for that world. Let me protect you from what's coming. Let me help manage this before it gets out of control. There it was. The real reason for the midnight visit, wrapped in roses and false concern. Protect me from success? I asked quietly. Or protect yourself from my independence? His jaw tightened slightly, but he recovered quickly. I'm trying to protect us. Our marriage. Don't you remember what we were like in the beginning? He walked to the sound system and pulled up his phone. Our wedding song started playing, a jazz standard I'd once loved. The memory of us dancing at our reception flickered through my mind. Me in white, him promising forever. Both of us believing we were beginning something beautiful. You were so full of life then, Damien said, his voice going soft with manufactured nostalgia. So creative and passionate. I've always seen your potential, Evie. That's why I pushed you. I wanted you to be your best self. The nickname, Maya's nickname, sounded wrong in his mouth. And the revision of history was breathtaking in its audacity. He'd pushed me, yes, right off the stage and into the shadows. You pushed me away from everything that made me who I was. I corrected. You packed away my canvases. You mocked my childish hobbies. You made me believe that the only value I had was in how young and quiet and decorative I could be. That's not fair. It's exactly fair. You pushed me, Damien. Just not toward anything. You pushed me off the stage entirely. The song played on, but the magic it once held was gone. I let it finish, a funeral for who we'd been, before I turned it off. I have a proposal, Damien said, shifting tactics. Come to the emergency investor meeting on Friday. Just smile. Be the graceful wife you've always been. Help me calm the board's concerns about the discrimination investigation. Do this one thing for me, and I'll make sure the press treats you kindly with your campaign. I still have connections, Evelyn. I can help you, or I can make things very difficult. The threat underneath the request was clear. Support him publicly, or watch him try to destroy what I'd built. My phone buzzed. Maya's name lit up the screen, and I answered on speaker without thinking. Hey, Evie. The campaign numbers are insane. Clara just called. Your concept boards for the next phase had the executives literally applauding. They want to expand your role, maybe even make you creative director for the entire Reclaiming Grace line. Can you talk? I watched Damien's face shift, the careful control cracking as he realized how much was happening without him. I'll call you back, Maya. After I hung up, the silence stretched between us like a chasm. Damien's expression had hardened, the vulnerable husband mask slipping to reveal the CEO who didn't like losing. I see, he said coldly. You've already made your choice. You'd rather have your moment of fame than save our marriage. If we're really talking about saving our marriage, I said, each word deliberate, then we do it with a therapist in the room. Real conversations, real accountability, real change. Or we do it with lawyers and divide what's left fairly. Those are your options. He laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. Therapy? You think I'm going to sit in some office and be lectured about my feelings? Then his face changed when I mentioned lawyers. So you're serious? You'd really throw away everything we have? You threw it away the first time you decided I was expiring, I said. I'm just finally accepting what you've been telling me for years. This marriage has an expiration date. The only question is whether we acknowledge it honestly or keep performing for an audience that's stopped buying tickets. Damien stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. Maybe he was. The woman he'd married, the one who'd absorb his criticism and apologized for aging, was gone. In her place stood someone who knew her worth, who'd found it again in paint and canvas, and the courage to say no. I need to think, he said finally, grabbing his jacket. You do that, I replied. I have work to finish. After he left, I found an envelope Maya had sent earlier that week, one I'd been too nervous to open. Inside was a USB drive and a note. Insurance, just in case. You'll know when to use it. I plug it into my laptop. Screenshots loaded, texts between Damien and Vanessa, casual and cruel. Messages where he called me past my prime. Memos where he'd suggested the company pivot to youth-forward branding exclusively. Email chains dismissing qualified candidates because they were over 40. It was a mirror he couldn't avoid, evidence he couldn't charm away. I saved copies everywhere and went to bed knowing exactly what Friday's meeting would bring. Not reconciliation. Not performance. Just truth, sharp and unavoidable. The next morning, Clara called with strategic advice.
Don't go to war, she said.
Build a win he can't live beside. I'm proposing we launch the Reclaiming Grace Fund, a philanthropic arm supporting women re-entering creative careers after life disruptions. Grants, mentorship, resources. You'd be the founder and face of it. A fund. My mind raced with possibilities. It positions you as a leader in the space, not just an artist. It makes your story about elevation, not revenge. And frankly, it'll make investors notice the market power of the demographic your husband's been dismissing. Economics always speak louder than ethics. She was right. This wasn't about destroying Damien, it was about building something he could never touch. I'm in, I said. Let's do it. Friday arrived with the weight of finality. I stood before my closet, looking at two options: the glittering mermaid gown Damien had always loved, tight, decorative, designed to make me look like a prize, and a sharp, simple tuxedo-style suit I'd bought for myself. Classic, powerful, unapologetically elegant. I chose the suit. When I walked into that conference room wearing my own armor, carrying a portfolio labeled E, Heart/Reclaiming Grace, I felt every eye in the room assess and reassess me. Damien sat at the head of the table, his expression carefully neutral, but I saw the flash of anger when he noticed I wasn't wearing the dress he'd expected. The cameras were already recording. His board meeting had become a public relations necessity. This wasn't going to be his show anymore. It was going to be mine. The conference room walls were glass, Damien's design choice, meant to project transparency. This morning, that transparency was about to work against him. I set my portfolio on the polished table and looked at the 15 board members, the company council, and the handful of executives Damien had assembled to witness what he assumed would be my supportive testimony. Instead, I opened my presentation. Thank you for having me. I began, my voice steady. I'm here to discuss the economics of dignity, specifically how women over 35 represent the fastest-growing and highest-spending demographic in luxury wellness, beauty, and lifestyle sectors, yet remain functionally invisible in most marketing strategies. I clicked to my first slide. Data filled the screen: purchasing power, brand loyalty metrics, market growth projections. Damien's eyes narrowed, but he couldn't interrupt without looking threatened. The Reclaiming Grace campaign launched 48 hours ago. In that time, we've seen engagement rates 300% higher than industry average, overwhelmingly positive sentiment analysis, and, most importantly, conversion rates that suggest we're not just capturing attention, but creating lasting brand relationships. I clicked again. The next slide showed my freelance portfolio, local businesses whose revenue had increased after incorporating my designs, testimonials from clients, concrete proof that I wasn't just an artist but a strategist who understood markets and people. One of the board members, Patricia Churn, leaned forward. Mrs. Hart, these numbers are impressive. But with respect, how does this relate to our current situation? I'm getting there. I clicked to a new slide, the campaign's demographic breakdown. 62% of your current customer base is over 40. Yet your recent marketing materials, hiring practices, and internal culture suggest you're actively alienating the people who fund your company. Damien finally spoke, his tone measured but cold. With respect, Evelyn is an artist, not an operator. These numbers, while interesting, don't reflect the complexities of discriminating against your most loyal customers? Clara's voice cut through the video feed as her face appeared on the conference screen. Because that's what your internal memos suggest, Mr. Hart. The room went silent. Clara smiled professionally. I'm Clara Walsh, Creative Director of Lux and Legacy. We've been authorized to announce a partnership with Evelyn Hart to launch the Reclaiming Grace Fund, a philanthropic initiative supporting women re-entering creative industries. However, our legal team requires partner companies to sign a public pledge against age-based branding discrimination. I'm here to formally request Hartman Industries be the first signatory. Patricia's pen was already moving, taking notes. The company counsel's face had gone carefully blank. Damien looked like he'd been slapped. This is highly irregular, he started. The conference room door opened. Security walked in, followed by Vanessa. She looked terrified but determined, clutching a folder. I'm sorry, Vanessa said quietly, not looking at Damien. But I was told there would be protection if I came forward. Clara nodded. Ms. Reeves has agreed to provide testimony regarding internal communications and hiring practices. Her attorney is outside. Vanessa's hands shook as she opened her folder, but her voice grew stronger. Mr. Hart asked me to implement what he called youth filters in the hiring process. Resumes from applicants over 38 were automatically deprioritized. He also made numerous comments about Mrs. Hart in company Slack channels and private messages. I pulled out the USB drive Maya had given me and slid it across the table to the council. I believe you'll find corroborating evidence here. Screenshots of texts where my husband discussed my age in derogatory terms. Memos proposing age-based discrimination as company policy. Email chains dismissing qualified candidates explicitly because of their age. The council plugged in the drive. The screen filled with Damien's own words, projected large enough for everyone to see.
Old. Slow.
Past her shelf life. Why hire someone planning their retirement over someone building their career? Youth sells. Period. The room erupted in whispers. Patricia's expression had gone from curious to furious. Another director pulled out his phone, already calculating liability. Damien stood, his chair scraping loud against the floor. This is a setup. My wife is bitter about our marital issues and she's weaponizing. Your own words. I interrupted, my voice cutting through his bluster. Your own policies? I didn't create this evidence, Damien. I just stopped hiding it. He turned to me then, and for a moment, the mask dropped completely. You're destroying me. You did that, I said quietly, when you decided my value expired with my youth. This is just making sure everyone else sees what I've lived with. The council spoke up, her tone professional but urgent. The board needs to meet in executive session. Mr. Hart, I recommend you retain separate legal counsel. Mrs. Hart, Ms. Walsh, Ms. Reeves, will need formal statements. Patricia stood, her authority filling the room. I move that we sign Ms. Walsh's pledge immediately, as damage control if nothing else. And I strongly recommend we begin discussing leadership transitions. The vote was swift. 12 for, 3 abstaining, none against. Damien's face went white. Within an hour, news outlets had the story. Hartman Industries signs anti-discrimination pledge after internal investigation. The stock dipped, then slowly stabilized as investors saw the company trying to get ahead of the scandal. Legal teams descended. Damien was asked, politely but firmly, to step back from day-to-day operations pending review. I stood in the glass corridor outside the conference room, watching Damien gather his belongings. He looked smaller somehow, diminished not by age but by exposure. When he passed me, he stopped. You're destroying me, he said again. I met his eyes without flinching. You did that when you decided my value by the hourglass. I'm just done pretending not to notice. He walked away, his reflection warped in the building's glass panels, small, distorted, alone. I took a breath and walked the other direction, toward Clara and Maya who were waiting by the elevators. Toward the future I was building, brick by careful brick. The call came from a primetime news producer. We're doing a special on ageism in corporate America. We'd love to have you on the panel. I stared at the email invitation, my thumb hovering over the decline button. Going on television, speaking publicly about what happened, it felt like standing naked in front of the world. But then I thought about Vanessa's shaking hands as she'd testified. About the women who'd commented on the Reclaiming Grace campaign saying, "I thought it was just me." About the woman I'd been 2 years ago, silently absorbing every criticism, believing I was the problem. I hit accept. The green room backstage was cold and smelled like hairspray and nerves. Maya sat beside me, pinning a small silver mirror charm to my lapel. When they try to make you look small, show them who's in the frame. What if I freeze? What if I say the wrong thing? Then you'll be human, Maya said simply. That's the whole point, isn't it? Being human, visible, imperfect, and still worthy. The producer appeared. "Mrs. Hart, we're ready for you." The studio lights were blinding. For other panelists sat in a semicircle, a journalist, a CEO, an academic, and an actress I vaguely recognized. The host, Jennifer Kim, had built a career on asking questions that made people uncomfortable in illuminating ways. "Evelyn Hart," she began, "your story has captured national attention this week. Can you tell us what prompted you to speak out about your experiences?" I took a breath, found the camera, and spoke. "I was told not to embarrass my husband by aging. So I embarrassed him by existing." The audience gasped. Jennifer leaned forward. "Explain that." "For 6 years, I absorbed the message that my value was depreciating, that wrinkles were failures, that aging was something to apologize for. I tried to be younger, smaller, quieter. I erased myself trying to fit into someone else's expectations. And then one day, I decided to exist loudly instead. I painted. I created. I took up space. And that, existing as a fully human woman over 35, was apparently the most embarrassing thing I could do." "But you didn't stop there," Jennifer prompted.
No.
"Because once I started looking, I saw the pattern everywhere. In hiring practices, in marketing, in the way we talk about women versus men as they age. George Clooney gets distinguished. Women get past their prime. That's not natural, it's constructed. And we can deconstruct it." The floodgates opened. Audience members stood, sharing their stories in 30-second bursts that somehow contained entire lifetimes. A teacher denied promotion because she didn't have the energy of younger faculty. A marketing executive told to dress younger for client meetings. A mother returning to work after raising children told she was out of touch with current trends despite having more experience than anyone in the room. The stories poured out like a dam breaking. I listened to every single one, and when Jennifer turned back to me, I spoke from somewhere deeper than script or strategy. We are not expired. We're rare. We're women who survived everything we survived and still chose to create, to build, to exist. That's not something to hide. It's the luxury they should be selling. The audience erupted. Not polite applause, but standing ovation, the kind that fills a room with collective catharsis. Then Jennifer said, "We have a special presentation. The full Reclaiming Grace campaign premieres tonight." The studio lights dimmed. The screen filled with my art, my face, my words. Women aged 35 to 70 moving through the frames, creating, laughing, sweating, negotiating, loving, living. The narrative voice was mine. They told us to hide the lines. We learned to read them like maps. They told us we were fading. We learned we were rare. They told us to be quiet. We learned that silence is not grace, visibility is. We are not apologizing anymore. We are the luxury. The final shot was me, looking directly at the camera, natural light catching every line, every imperfection, every year I'd earned. The tagline appeared, "Reclaiming Grace, because beauty isn't lost with age, it's reclaimed with courage." The studio audience was crying. I was crying. And somewhere, in a conference room or a bar or his empty penthouse, Damien was watching everything he'd tried to bury come to light. My phone exploded with notifications. The campaign was trending across every platform. But one notification stood out, a video Damien had just posted, a polished apology, professionally lit, carefully worded. Within minutes, the internet did what it does best. Someone found old audio from a party. Damien's voice sang, "Aging too fast for my lifestyle," and spliced it over his apology video. The memes spread like wildfire. His attempt at redemption became evidence of his hypocrisy. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt tired. This wasn't about destroying him. It never had been. It was about building something he couldn't touch, creating space for women like me, like Vanessa, like every woman who'd been told she was expiring right on schedule. The next morning, legal papers arrived. A class action lawsuit against Hartman Industries, filed by former employees alleging age discrimination. Vanessa's testimony had opened the floodgates. More women came forward, each with their story, their evidence, their refusal to stay silent. The board held an emergency session. By afternoon, the announcement came. Damien Hart has resigned as CEO, effective immediately, to focus on personal matters. The photo of him leaving the building, carrying a cardboard box, went viral. In the lobby behind him, a mirror caught his reflection passing the empty spot where his portrait had hung. In its place was a framed copy of the Anti-Discrimination Pledge, signed by the board and countersigned by the Reclaiming Grace Fund. That evening, an invitation arrived, digital, formal, significant. The Global Brand Ethics Summit wanted me to keynote their annual conference. The slot had been promised to Damien 6 months ago. I called Clara. Is this real? Very real. They wanted to talk about the intersection of ethics, economics, and aging. About how dignity is profitable. About how what happened to you is happening everywhere and how we change it. I accepted before fear could talk me out of it. I had one line already written for the speech. Love is not a branding strategy. Neither is youth. But dignity scales. The cafe was small, nothing like the places Damien usually frequented. He'd chosen it deliberately. Near our first apartment, the one we'd lived in before money and status and carefully curated images became the language we spoke. I arrived 15 minutes early and watched through the window as he walked up, looking older than I'd ever seen him. Not old, just human. Grief without gloss. He sat down across from me. No flowers this time, no rehearsed softness. Just Damien, stripped of the corporate armor, looking at me like he was seeing me for the first time in years. Thank you for coming, he said quietly. You said you wanted to talk.
So talk.
He folded his hands on the table, and I noticed he wasn't wearing his wedding ring. Neither was I. I was wrong. About everything. About you, about aging, about what matters. I measured your value like you were a stock portfolio, and I destroyed the best thing in my life because I couldn't see past my own shallow metrics. The apology landed differently than his previous attempts. No performance, no audience, no angle. Just honesty, raw and painful. Why now? I asked. Why not 2 years ago, or 3, when I was still begging for scraps of your affection? Because I couldn't see it then. I thought I was successful, the CEO, the penthouse, the perfect image. But I lost the only person who ever saw me as more than that. And now I'm sitting in a bankrupt company's shadow, facing lawsuits, watching you build something extraordinary, and realizing I had everything and threw it away for nothing. I slid an envelope across the table. Divorce papers. Fair settlement, no games. Part of the agreement includes your funded contribution to the Reclaiming Grace Fund, not as punishment, but as repair. This is what accountability looks like. Take it or leave it. He opened the envelope, read through the pages slowly. I watched his face move through emotions, pain, acceptance, something that might have been relief. You're being more than fair. I'm being done, I corrected. Fair is just the fastest route to freedom. He pulled a pen from his jacket and signed. Right there, in a cafe that smelled like coffee and endings, our marriage became paperwork. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. You were always the brave one, he said.
No, irablia.
I learned. There's a difference between always being brave and becoming brave.
You taught me that, actually.
You taught me what happens when you don't stand up for yourself. We sat in silence for a moment, two people who'd promised forever and landed on goodbye. I hope you find whatever you're looking for, I said, standing to leave. I hope you learn to see people as more than their market value. And I hope you figure out who you are when no one's watching. Evelyn, He stood too, and for a second, I thought he might try to touch me, to bridge the unbridgeable. But he didn't. I hope you know you're extraordinary. I'm sorry it took losing you for me to see it. I nodded and walked away. Outside, rain began to fall, soft, cleansing, marking the transition from one season to the next. We stood under separate awnings, neither of us moving. Then he went left toward his lawyer's office, and I went right toward mine. I didn't look back. 3 months later, Maya and I stood outside a converted warehouse in the Arts District, holding oversized scissors and grinning like idiots. The banner above us read, "Reclaiming Grace Studio One, where stories begin again." The ribbon-cutting ceremony was small but mighty. Local press, community members, the first cohort of fellows we'd accepted into the program. 20 women, ages 38 to 67, each with a story about being told they were too late, too old, too past their moment to matter. Inside, the space glowed with possibility. Art studios with natural light. Computer stations for digital work. A childcare room painted like a garden. A gallery wall already filling with portraits of fellows, each with a quote about second chances. I mounted my original vanity mirror, the one I'd stared into while Damien criticized and controlled, in the lobby. A brass plate beneath it read, "This reflection belongs to you." Throughout the day, I watched women approach it. They'd pause, study themselves, touch the frame gently. Some cried. Some smiled. Some stood straighter, seeing themselves reflected in a space that celebrated rather than critiqued. That evening, my solo exhibition opened across town. Shine Without was a collection of everything I'd painted over the past year. Transformation in unfiltered light, beauty in unexpected places, women reclaiming space one canvas at a time. The centerpiece was a self-portrait titled after the gala. In it, my face was turned toward a window, soft lines around my eyes, expression steady and certain. I'd painted myself the way I wanted to be seen, human, present, alive. Clara found me standing in front of it. "You know this is going to sell, right? I have 3 collectors already asking." "It's not for sale," I said. "This one stays with me." At the gallery opening, a man approached, photographer in his 40s, kind eyes, asking thoughtful questions about the work without centering himself in the conversation. Clara introduced us. Julian, her colleague from a documentary project. "May I take your picture?" he asked. "Not for publication, just for the archive. We're documenting artists who've influenced the movement." I smiled. "Not yet." He nodded, respecting the boundary, without pushing. "Fair enough. Maybe sometime." "Maybe," I agreed. The next week, I stood on the stage of the Global Brand Ethics Summit, looking out at 800 industry leaders, executives, and creatives. The keynote slot had been Damien's. Now it was mine. I took a breath and began. 2 years ago, I was told I was aging too fast for someone else's lifestyle. Today, I'm here to tell you that aging isn't the problem. It's the only thing we're all guaranteed to do if we're lucky enough to keep living. The problem is a culture that treats aging as a failure instead of an achievement. I clicked to my first slide, data, economics, the undeniable truth that women over 35 controlled the majority of consumer spending but remained functionally invisible in most marketing. Dignity isn't just ethics. It's economics. When you see people as human, full, complex, evolving human beings, you don't just do right by them. You unlock markets. You build loyalty. You create communities that sustain themselves because they're rooted in truth rather than fantasy. I told my story, not as a victim,